If you ask my Italian-American family, Aria Mia Loberti. If you ask anybody else, Aria Mia Loberti, but call me Arya. Thank you.
Well, it's great to see you, and obviously Louis Hofmann as well. And let's give them all a round of applause. And Shawn, I thought I'd start with you. I think, is it safe to say you've never tackled something cool like this before? I mean, a lot of people know you from Night at the Museum, Stranger Things, The Adam Project. I know you're in pre-production for Deadpool 3 right now, and you've been so successful in so many genres. But would you say this is a departure for you, Shawn?
Without question. Without question. It's a departure that I've waited a long time to try. I read this book when it first came out, like many of us did, and I adored it, and it moved me deeply. But at that time, the rights were unavailable, and someone was developing it as a movie, and I was also at that point kind of known as the family comedy director, so not the period piece drama. It wasn't the first thing that sprung to mind, but I think like many of us, I wanted to see if I could do something more than I'd done. And so this was a huge privilege.
Well, when you take an incredibly popular novel like this, as you said, you loved it, has a huge fan base. How much pressure was there for you, Shawn, to stay true to it? And did you feel at all restricted by that? And by the way, this is Ingrid.
Yes, this is Ingrid. Ingrid was our secret weapon on our shoot.
I feel rude that I didn't introduce Ingrid.
Come on, Katie Couric. Yeah, I mean, I did feel pressure, but I think the good news is I am as big a fan of the book as so many people are. So I knew that if I did right by the material, in my own opinion, as a fan of the book, probably other fans of the book would be happy with the work as well. So I just kind of I trusted that inner barometer.
Right.
It was also a way to be in slight denial over the pressure.
And also, I guess you treated the source material with a lot of reverence as you adapted it.
Well, and I think that's why they tried and failed to turn it into a movie. I think it's too dense to do as a 2-hour story. Anthony Doerr, the novelist, built such a complex and suspenseful intercut structure. And I always thought it was almost romantic in the way it follows these two young characters separately, but almost destined to intersect. And so I tried to honor what was on the page of the novel and to adapt it into this different form.
I'll ask Arya in a moment about what it was like from her perspective, but Shawn, I know you did a global search for the character of Marie. Can you talk about that process and why Arya was ultimately chosen? I think we all know just watching her act, but can you just give us a little of that story?
Because I think it's, I mean, it's a process that changed me. I decided early in pre-production that the right way to do this story was to do it with authenticity, which meant casting a young and a grown-up Marie who would not be guessing at what that experience is or approximating what that experience is, but who had the lived experience of navigating the world and coming of age with the unique experience of either low vision or blindness. And so we put out a global casting announcement. We got hundreds upon hundreds of auditions, people in their dorm rooms, people in their bedrooms, people in their living rooms, some sighted actors, some non-sighted actors, and many non-actors, one of whom was a Fulbright scholar, PhD candidate in rhetoric at Penn State, Penn State, who sent in a recording from her dorm room. And it was one of hundreds that I watched, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, what am I seeing? What am I seeing? I think I found it. And then I met Arya, and what she's done.
She had you at hello.
Oh, she sure did. She sure did.
Arya, I know you've never acted professionally before, and Shawn kind of co-opted a bit of my question by giving out your CV, but I'm going to do it again because it's so impressive. Damn woman. You've received your master's in ancient rhetoric at the University of London on a Fulbright scholarship. That's right. You are, as Shawn said, getting your PhD in ancient rhetoric at Penn State. I was going to describe you as a smart cookie, and then I realized men are never called cookies. So I'm just going to say you're damn smart, Arya. So tell me why you wanted to be a part of this project and how you learned about it, and just a little about what it was like from your perspective.
Well, I really just auditioned because I loved the material, source material. The book was so special to my mom in particular, but also to me. And I was sort of having a bad week. And so
you were getting sick of ancient rhetoric?
I was kind of like at that point where you're like, you've had like an abundance of beautiful things happen to you, and I was really grateful. And I had a challenging childhood with bullying and whatever, and so I'm so grateful that I was able to have the opportunities that I had to get educated, because I always fought for that, but was feeling a bit down. And I'm like, well, I just moved. I need something to cheer me up. I heard from a teacher who I hadn't talked to since I was 11, and she thought that I might be interested in this, and I was like, no, I don't act. And I never auditioned for anything ever, so that was stressful. But then I just figured I loved the book and I loved the character, and I thought maybe I could do it and it would be fun, but I didn't have any friends, so I read all of the Mark Ruffalo lines to myself on my iPad first, and then I would hit play. And then I didn't think anyone would see it, and then like less than 12 hours later, I had an email back that was like, will you come do a Zoom? And then 2.5 weeks later, the rest is history, and that involved a lot of crying.
I was going to ask you, what was your reaction, Arya, when you got the role? I mean, take us back to when you heard the news, because I mean, it's such a fairy tale story.
Yeah, I think, well, that's what's so scary about it is it feels like it's a made-up story, even more so than the fantasy of the film or the book. I had a speech prepared about how grateful I was that Shawn was looking to cast a blind actor in this role. So I had this all prepared. I worked on it with my mom, and I was like, I figured out that I really love acting. I would love to learn how I might be able to be involved with community theater, and maybe how I can boost my confidence. And I had this lovely speech, and I didn't get to give it because I got on Zoom with Shawn, and he said, well, there are lots of, I think it was something along the lines of, there are lots of moments in our lives that change you, but then there are moments where your lives just change completely. And it's not you that's changing, it's your life that's changing, and this is one for you. And congratulations.
Wow, I had completely forgotten that.
Yeah.
They're showing you're really good at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Aria's first words were, can we call my parents? And so Aria and I are on Zoom, and I call her mom and dad on my phone, because I said, you want to call? She said, I can't dial, I don't know what's happening. I think their number is, so I called her mom and dad. And like, hi, my name's Shawn, I'm directing. And there was somewhere I have it all on video because my 4 daughters were just off camera watching this.
Yeah.
And did your parents freak out?
Oh, yes.
They're still freaking out. Yeah.
Before I get to Louis, I wanted to ask you, Arya, what was or were the biggest challenges going from really being an academic to being an actor?
I think at the beginning I was just so intimidated by being there because everyone else is at the top of their craft, and I had never done this before, and I was so terrified that I would get it wrong, or I would maybe ask the wrong question, and that quickly went away because Shawn took me under his wing in such a beautiful way. I went out about 3 weeks early, and I got to shadow Shawn filming or directing all of Lewis's scenes, and I learned the ropes, and it was like going to drama school. And I think what really helps me is the fact that I do bring an academic mind to this, and sometimes that means I intellectualize things a little too much, but I was able to really go back to the source material in this book that I love and that means so much to me, and create this character from scratch, because she's so drastically different from me as a person. And she lives in such a different time period. So I was able to use that skill as an academic, I think, to the best of my ability, and then just try to connect to the human side of it. And because that's what was missing out of my life, was the humanity, and now I have moved from the humanities to the humanity of acting.
You were, yeah, I think you were extraordinary in the role, really. I mean, congratulations. I've seen all 4 episodes because I got an advance copy to a link to prepare for this interview, and you just blew me away. And Louis, this is not your first rodeo. Like Aria, I mean, you've done a lot of acting already, even though you're, how old are you, Louis, by the way?
25.
Wow. Well, you were also extraordinary, I think, in this
Thank
series.
you.
So what was it that attracted you to the role, and how was it different than anything you had done before?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it was an absolute privilege to have Aria join the first couple of 3 weeks and to sort of have the opportunity to show her something of what I know, because that's always what I have been looking for, or I have been looking for when I grew up in the industry when I was younger, someone that would guide me a little bit. So it was such an amazing journey also for me to be part of your journey, and I'm just in awe of how you led this amazing ensemble that I'm so proud to be part of. So I just want to give this to you first before I say anything
I
else.
wouldn't have been able to get to that point if I hadn't had like mentorship from you as well.
I think there's a love fest going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't know the book. I hadn't heard of the book, but when I got instantly interested when I looked it up, I'm so sorry, yeah. And then I did the auditions, and I came in early to actually work on radios to prepare for the character, because I mean that is the beautiful and yet tragic thing about this character. What also got me interested in it was well, on one side very sensitive, but also it's this genius of knowing how to handle and build radios from scratch, and that is his absolute gift, but also becomes a burden to him, and that is so he suffers under the regime and under the circumstances of society, and sort of dragged into the cruelty of war, and but constantly fights against that and fights for the good, and fails and keeps on trying, and I think that was so beautiful about the character, and that's what had me instantly intrigued.
Is that it?
That was a great answer, though I think Ingrid is a little...
Ingrid, please!
She doesn't have please, does she, Arya? I'm just kidding. But let's talk a little bit, Louis, about, so you actually learned how to operate a radio. I mean, so you weren't faking it. How did you do that?
And built them, right?
Yeah, so Shawn, you cut that scene where I built that radio.
I know.
Yeah, so I had a week of training for about like 4 to 5 hours a day, just building a radio from scratch. And at the end of that week, I actually built a functioning radio, if it was 1940, a functioning radio in under a minute.
And now the world will know.
They will know, but you cut it.
Asshole director.
You cut the scene. It's
You
still
have
in
to
there.
put it in the
I
extras
know,
or
see,
something,
now
Shawn.
I'm sure it will be well publicized.
See, as I watched this, the depravity of the Nazis, I mean, it just was reinforced. It's obviously something I knew very well through history and through literature and through other portrayals of this period in world history. But I'm curious if any of you felt there were some chilling parallels between what was happening and that period of history and what you're seeing happening today.
Well, this was the craziest thing. I don't know if did you see the episode where Daniel and Marie have to leave Paris suddenly? So that's based on an actual day in June of that year where something like 2 million Parisians just started walking, and we had extras in that scene.
Including my mom.
Including your mom, but including Ukrainian refugees who had walked into Hungary from Ukraine, headed west towards uncertainty to escape an invading army from the east. And we're filming a scene about an exodus west to run away from an invading army from the... It was so, you use the word chilling, it was horrific. And frankly, just deeply saddening that this history is being replicated and replayed in some ways that are so blatant and so appallingly horrific, and to be telling the story in a part of the world where that was local, where that felt near, was quite chilling. And we wrote, Stephen Knight and I, when we were working on the script right before we filmed, but after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we wrote some scenes where the professor is talking about the tyrant and the invasion of cities, where we wrote them specifically to lean into the horrifying timeliness of this story.
And the rise in anti-Semitism and authoritarian regimes that are taking over all over the world. It's sort of too upsetting to be true, but I think it does make it very timely and prescient.
Yeah, and I wish that it weren't.
Yeah.
But to be able to comment and shine a light, pun slightly intended, to shine a light on the kind of repetitiveness of the worst sides of human nature. At least as a creative team, we knew that was a privilege.
Mark Ruffalo and Hugh Laurie are not here, but obviously they're huge names. And for these young actors, I'm curious, Arya and Louis, what it was like working with people of that stature, and were they nice or were they jerks? I'm just kidding. But what was it like?
It was an absolute privilege to work with these, and Hugh is a master of his craft. He's the absolute nicest person on the planet, and the funniest as well.
And very funny.
And very funny.
Very funny.
And I remember we would always mock his accent on set, and well, now I sound like a Brit as well, but we'd always go like, Hugh Laurie, and I'm off to set now, and then I'm going to tell a story about the beautiful ways of living a life.
And he knows we made fun of him, so it's okay.
He agreed to it as well. Yeah. And then Mark Ruffalo, so when Arya and I met, and also when Shawn and I first met, I think it was the first thing I said to both.
Yeah, he was like, welcome, happy to have you here, let me know if you have any questions. You have so many scenes with Mark Ruffalo, and I don't, and that's just so unfair.
Because I'm a huge fan.
There's a lovely picture.
There is a lovely picture
of the two of them that I took.
Because our paths crossed at least a couple of times.
And there's a picture of Louis just like looking up at Mark, like.
Telling him how great she is.
And I love it. But no, he deserves all of that, though. He's a lovely person.
He is, and very socially aware and conscious. And
he took time with me, really took time with me so that we could sell the relationship and make it beautiful. And what a good human being. He's just a treat to work with and a wonderful mentor. And what I really appreciate as a newcomer, that both Mark and Hugh gave me, and Louis as well, and Marion and Lars and the rest of our cast. They all had nerves too. I wasn't the only one who was nervous. They all had their own. And I figured by the time you make it to this level, you must have it all together.
You know what, Aria?
It's
I think
beautiful.
Those nerves also. I think part of it is we take this source material really seriously. Yeah. But it was a new experience for all of us to work with someone who has a completely different experience than us. And so I know for me, and Louis, you can speak for yourself, but the way that I directed, the things I learned about directing in different ways as a result of working with Arya were once in a lifetime. Because so many of the things that we assume, like if I'm directing a scene, normally I might just catch the actor's eye and make a face to tell them how I might want it differently. But I realized early with Arya that it was so important to create a really intimate connection, to use my words and the way that I say my words in a way that was resonant for Arya. And in exchange, frankly, in almost any scene, there's examples of things that I would not have known about the experience of being blind if Arya didn't tell me and tell Mark and tell Hugh and Louis every day, oh no, that's actually the way blindness is represented. That's not authentic lived experience. Let me tell you about lived experience.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I think there's so many, so feel free to cut me off because I know this is I might tend to ramble. I get really nerdy about this one. But one of the best moments, I think, was on my very first day, filming my very first scene, which is the first scene of the show, and changing the character's eye line, because my eye line and my experience, again, very, very different from this character, is you always simulate eye contact. I have enough vision that sometimes I can make it truthfully, but you always simulate it. And with this character, I've been taught that you have to be accepted by the sighted world, and so you're going to use your gaze will follow your hand to the radio dial. And so I, as Arya, was doing that. And then Shawn and I had this really nice conversation of why is that a trait that I do? Why that may not be communicating well enough to an audience who might not be exposed to this community that was blindness, but that is an experience of blindness. How can we communicate it better? And it gets down to the fact that this young girl, her father is teaching her the ways of the world. She doesn't have everything we have at our disposal. She doesn't have the technology. She doesn't have the iPhone, and doesn't have resources, teachers to teach her orientation and mobility techniques. So she wouldn't know that. So this is an interesting way to communicate. If I go to the radio dial, my gaze is going to remain here as opposed to following the hand.
Can I give another example?
Yeah, sure.
When we were in Tribeca when we first met in person, and I was noticing how Arya was reaching for her tea.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, I was like, wait, you're using the back of your hand. And Arya taught me that day, well, yes, we don't use our fingertips. If we used our fingertips all the time, there's a sensitivity to it, right?
And you would maybe get injured, or I'm not a braille reader, but my character is. So like for her, there's a sensitivity to the fingertips that's very particular.
So like a detail like that, she uses the back of her hand to find a glass, and then takes it with the fingertips. So just there's a lot of those little things.
All through high school, Arya, I worked at a summer camp for blind kids.
Really?
Yeah,
that's so cool.
In Washington, D.C. And I'm curious if there are other things that you hope you'll be able to communicate to an audience about blindness and that they may not be aware of. Sometimes I see people giving their arms to people who are visually impaired in the wrong way.
So awkward.
And also, you know what I mean? And they'll grab them, and it's someone grabs your elbow, and that's how you properly guide someone who is visually impaired. But I'm also curious what you wanted to teach an audience, but also I am curious what you never read Braille, or you never learned to read Braille.
I learned it, and then I quickly realized that it just wasn't something I enjoyed, or I was an audio person. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you said, the technology has changed so much.
It's changed, yeah. And I mean, in a lot of ways, like that was really challenging for me, even as someone who loves history and has really, really deep dived into the book to bring the authenticity of the story to the table. Your experience, I think, anyone with a physical disability is going to be very different from time period to time period, more so than the average person. And so the cane technique, like a white cane would have been only 5 to 10 years old at this point, and it really only would have been used for identification. So she is learning as she's doing it. Whereas kids nowadays, if you're born with your eye condition like I was, or if you go blind during your school years, you have like training every week that you take as a supplementary class. You learn Braille, you learn all of these techniques. She didn't have any of that. So correction on my bad Braille, because she wouldn't have had a teacher telling her to glide her finger over the page. She'd be scrubbing, as you see in like the opening. She like scrubs her fingers.
Mm-hmm.
The hand grip on the cane is totally different. I worked with Joe, who was our accessibility consultant, on the cane having an appropriate cane grip, but also canes nowadays have a little bit of a bounce to them. I'm not a cane user anymore, so that was new territory for me. But I had to use a cane full time until I qualified for a guide dog, which is an opportunity she would never have had.
But Arya, can I jump in? For instance, Nell, who played young Marie, she doesn't have a guide dog. Now, I mean, all our hearts are collectively aching for Nell. Those scenes, I don't even think we could get through a take without tearing up. There was just such a spirit to that girl. But so Nell is a cane user, but Nell noticed that the tip of the cane in the 40s was a different material.
It's
It was
different.
wood,
It's wood
rather
instead
than
of, like,
rubber. So just
a
every
bouncy,
day,
yeah.
every day, I know, I think all of us learned new details that we only could have learned because we approached telling the story in this way.
That's wonderful,
So
and to
cool.
have somebody like Arya really almost be a consultant as well as an actor.
It was
Um,
amazing. I never thought I would be able to do anything like this, but then to have someone like Shawn, and now that I've been in the industry for a whole year, and like, and have worked, other people, that I go back to Shawn and I'm like, I am so grateful for him because I didn't know what a rarity it was to have someone listen to me and take my word and put it into practice and make it a part of creating art and creating meaning in people's lives. And I think it's a testament to him. I appreciate the credit, but I think it's a testament to Shawn for taking the time to listen, because without him, this wouldn't have happened. Even
What a wonderful
yeah.
compliment. Wow.
But also, I have to jump in there real quick
Yeah,
because
please.
I've been in the industry for 15 years now, but still working with Shawn was also for me such an extraordinary experience because you're talking about he listens to Shawn. You don't only listen, but like every second, every minute that you spend with us, it always meant extremely meaningful and was filled with information, emotion, and gratitude for the opportunity to be doing what you are doing. And you really know your shit. You really do.
God, let that be the headstone. It was
He
shit.
really do his shit. Rest in peace. We don't have a ton more time, but I as someone who watched the series, Shawn, I wondered if you could pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about the challenges, because it was so big, the special effects were so ginormous, the setting, well, I mean, it was complex, all different kinds of settings and scenes. Can you just talk about how you tackled this and give us some insight? I know people have 2 more hours to watch or 2 more episodes to watch, and I don't want to spoil anything, but just take us behind the curtain a little bit.
Well, I always felt that the book somehow managed to be epic and intimate, and most stories are one or the other. And so I wanted my show to be epic and intimate, and that's where my background, I mean, I've made 12 or 13 movies, and a lot of them had big scale and special effects. So scale isn't, I don't mistake that for the be-all end-all. I know how to do it. I've become really fluent with action and visual effects and special effects. But I know that you live or die on the connection to the characters. I've just seen it. Stranger Things gets a lot of attention because of the monsters and the Demogorgons, but mostly it is what it is because people love those kids and love those characters. And I've found this again and again in my work, even though they haven't been historic dramas. So for me, I wanted to deliver the broad, big canvas storytelling, but the beginning and the end and the priority every day was what's going on with the people. Because if people care about the characters on screen, they're going to be along for that ride. So for me, it was just a constant toggling between the epic and the intimate, which is another way of saying being loyal to the book.
Arya, how has this experience changed or shaped you? Obviously it has, and we referred to that earlier, but do you think it's changed the trajectory of your life? Is this something, would you like to continue acting, or do you want to go back to ancient rhetoric, which sounds fascinating, no offense. But what do you think, Arya? I mean, where do you go from here?
I think I never knew what I wanted to do with my life, and I'm so grateful that I was able to find it. And again, it's Shawn. So I think it's a privilege to be able to know what you want to get out of life and be able to do that thing. And it's an even bigger privilege to be able to share it with so many people. So I would absolutely love to continue on in the industry if y'all will have me. But I love it. I love writing. I would love to be a writer. I'd love to be creative. I'd love to, I think like Shawn's an amazing role model. Maybe someday tell my own stories, but I love acting, and I feel like that is just such a passion I never knew that I had. At the same time, it's a big responsibility for me because I never had a role model like me. I never had someone to look up to who was like me. And I realize now that I get to be that person, and that's a big responsibility. But I'm very grateful for the chance to do it, and I think to tell beautiful stories with beautiful people like these guys is the biggest privilege of my life or of anything. So thank you.
That's so lovely. And Louis, I know you have a lot of exciting projects ahead. I think you're working on something with Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, and you've got a lot of things on your plate. You've already accomplished so much at the ripe old age of 25. But I'm curious what you'll take with you from this experience as you tackle roles in the future. And you kind of refer to your interactions with Shawn, but how do you think this experience has changed and shaped you as an actor?
Well, I think, like Shawn touched base on, that we learn so much every day about seeing the world differently, experiencing the world differently, constantly learning, constantly evolving. I think that is what I'm going to take away, is how much we learned about all of this, and to see the world a little bit differently, I think, and to have a bigger understanding.
And I guess in closing, Shawn, I'm sure you're proud of a lot of things that you accomplished in this series. Is it nerve-wracking for you? I always think, you've worked so hard on a project. You pour your heart and soul into it.
The worst.
You have these extraordinary friendships and relationships, and yes, you take an epic story and you make it intimate. But it's a very intimate experience for you as a director. And I'm just wondering how you're feeling now that this is going to go out into the world.
I probably, as I mentioned to this crowd, this is the first group that's watched this show. And so today it begins. And it feels a lot like raising my 4 daughters and sending them out into the world. I love them too much, and it makes my heart hurt, and I want the world to treat them lovingly. And that's how I feel about this story that we made together. But I just know that it was made with feeling, and I want it to be received in that same spirit. But yeah, it's a vulnerable, fragile way to live, to send something you care about into the world.
Care about so deeply.
Yeah, and it feels important, right? I've made a lot of things, but I've never made something like this. And so it holds a unique place in my life.
Well, congratulations to all 3 of you, and I can't wait till it gets out into the world. Shawn, Aria, and Louis, thank you all so much. Please give them a huge round of applause.